My name is Calla Jameson. For most of my life, I believed my role in our family was to be the quiet shoreline to my sister's crashing waves, a place for things to settle, to be absorbed without complaint. It was a geography I had learned to navigate with a soft tread, a skill honed over 33 years of carefully managed expectations. My sister, Lily, was the sun, I was the shade she cast, and for a long time, I mistook that shadow for a place of rest. The air in our small corner of Colorado always carried the scent of pine and impending snow in late October, a clean, sharp fragrance that usually cleared my head. But as I pulled my modest sedan into my parents' driveway, the familiar scent felt heavy, thick with the unspoken tensions of a family gathering. It was their 40th wedding anniversary, a milestone my mother had been orchestrating with the precision of a military campaign for months. The house stood as it always had, a handsome two-story craftsman my grandfather had designed, with a wide porch and deep-set windows that seemed to watch the world with a reserved patience. It was the only home I had ever truly known. Lily's pearl-white SUV was already parked near the entrance, gleaming under the porch light as if it had been professionally detailed just for the occasion. She had likely flown in from Denver, breezing over the traffic and the long, contemplative stretches of highway I had just driven. I took a deep breath, the cold air stinging my lungs, and stepped out of the car. My legs felt stiff from the 4-hour drive, a journey I'd made from the small mountain town where I worked as a freelance illustrator and lived in a rented loft above a bookstore. In my hands, I carried my overnight bag and a small, simply wrapped gift, a leather-bound journal filled with my charcoal sketches of the landscapes around their home, a tribute to the place that had shaped my eye for beauty. I pushed the heavy oak door open without knocking, a habit from childhood that suddenly felt like a transgression. The house was warm, smelling of roasted chicken and my mother's expensive potpourri. "Oh, Calla, you're here," my mother, Beverly, said from the kitchen. Her voice was bright, but her eyes did a quick, critical scan of my jeans and simple cashmere sweater. Lily was perched on a stool at the granite island, laughing at something my father, Howard, was saying. She turned, a brilliant smile flashing across her face, her blonde hair falling in a perfect curtain over her shoulders. "You look exhausted," she commented, not unkindly, but with the casual assessment of someone who rarely was. "The drive was long," I said, setting my bag by the staircase. "Hi, Dad." He gave me a cursory nod, his attention already returning to Lily. "You should have driven up yesterday. We had a lovely Chardonnay." "Work," I said, the single-word explanation I often used. It was easier than explaining the quiet demands of my life, a life they considered a placeholder until something more substantial, something more like Lily's, came along. Lily slid off the stool, the heels of her boots clicking softly on the slate tile. She gave me a brief, airy hug that was more a brushing of fabrics than a true embrace. I could smell her perfume, something light and floral and expensive. The table was already set for dinner, the good silver polished to a gleam. In the center, beside a vase of white lilies, sat 2 gift boxes. One was large and wrapped in shimmering silver paper, the other a plain, unsealed manila envelope. I knew, without having to ask, which was which. Dinner was a performance of familial harmony. Lily recounted her recent promotion at the marketing firm in Denver, her voice animated and confident. My parents listened, rapt, asking questions that prompted more stories of success. I ate my chicken, nodding at the right moments, feeling less like a participant and more like an audience member who had wandered into the wrong theater. "Still drawing your little pictures?" my father asked during a lull, a half-smile on his face as he refilled his own wine glass, but not my water. "It pays the bills," I answered quietly. "For now," my mother added, patting my hand with cool, dry fingers. "We worry, that's all." After the plates were cleared, my father stood, a theatrical flourish he reserved for special occasions. "Well, on to the main event. Beverly, my love, happy anniversary." He handed her a small, velvet box containing a diamond necklace I knew must have cost a fortune. She gasped, her delight genuine and radiant. Then he turned to my sister. "And Lily," he began, his voice softening with a deep, paternal pride. Your mother, and I know how much you've been wanting to put down roots. You've worked so hard. You've made us so proud. You've always been the one to build a life we can all admire. He lifted the silver box and presented it to her. Lily's eyes widened. With delicate fingers, she unwrapped the gift to reveal a smaller, elegant box inside. She lifted the lid. Resting on a bed of satin was a single brass key. A key, she laughed, a tinkling, delighted sound. To this house, my father said, his voice thick with emotion. The deed is already transferred. It's yours, sweetheart. A place to start your own family. Lily's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes welling with tears. Oh, Dad. Mom. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, my mother cooed, beaming. You deserve it. They all hugged, a tight circle of celebration. I sat very still, my hands folded in my lap. The air in the room seemed to have thinned, making it hard to breathe. The house, my grandfather's house, the house with the window seat in my bedroom where I'd spent thousands of hours reading and dreaming, the garden where I'd helped Grandpa plant the peony bushes, was no longer a part of my story. Then, almost as an afterthought, my mother picked up the manila envelope and slid it across the table toward me. And we didn't forget you, Kala. My name was written on the front in her neat, slanted script. Inside, there was no card, no note. Just a single sheet of paper, a printout from a job board. Office manager. Atherton Logistics. Full-time, benefits included. Salary, $45,000. Location, Commerce City. My father chuckled, a low, rumbling sound. We thought it was time you had something more stable. A real job with a 401k. It's more your speed, something manageable. Manageable. The word hung in the air, a quiet indictment of my entire life. I looked from the job ad to the gleaming key in Lily's hand. I felt a strange calm settle over me, a clarity that was cold and sharp. I didn't scream. I didn't argue. I picked up the sketch journal I'd brought for them and placed it in the center of the table. Happy anniversary, I said, my voice even. My mother opened it, her smile faltering as she flipped through the pages. She saw the detailed drawings of the porch swing, the light in the kitchen, the view from my old bedroom window. My father's face went still. Lily glanced at it, then quickly looked away, a flicker of discomfort in her eyes. The gift was a mirror, and they didn't like the reflection. That's lovely, dear, my mother said, closing the book. I stood up. I should get going. I have an early start tomorrow. No one tried to stop me. As I walked to the door, I passed the small alcove by the laundry room. Tucked behind a basket of clean towels were 3 cardboard boxes, neatly taped and labeled in my father's block letters. Kala's bedroom. Kala's books. Kala, miscellaneous. They hadn't just given my home away. They had already erased me from it. The door closed behind me with a quiet click. Outside, the night was vast and cold. I stood on the porch for a long moment, looking at the familiar silhouette of the mountains against the starry sky. I wasn't crying. The feeling was deeper than tears, a hollow ache that resonated in my bones. They had handed Lily a key and me an eviction notice disguised as concern. And in that moment, something inside me, something I had kept quiet and still for years, began to stir. It wasn't a wave of anger. It was the slow, tectonic shift of the shoreline itself. The drive back to my loft was a blur of headlights and dark, empty roads. I didn't turn on the radio. The silence was a necessary companion, allowing the events of the evening to settle not as a chaotic storm, but as distinct, painful truths. When I finally walked into my apartment, the familiar scent of old books and brewing tea felt like a sanctuary. It was a space that was entirely mine, where every object held a piece of my story, not one curated by my parents. I didn't sleep. Instead, I sat on the worn velvet armchair by the window, the job ad resting on the small table beside me. Manageable. The word was a splinter under the skin. It implied that my life, my art, my quiet independence, was something chaotic and untamed that needed to be brought to heel. They didn't see it as a choice, but as a failure to launch. The first hint of dawn was streaking the sky in shades of pale rose and lavender when I finally moved. I made a pot of strong black tea and pulled out my laptop. There was a nagging detail that wouldn't leave me alone. The way my father had said, the deed is already transferred. A property transfer, especially one involving a house my grandfather had left to both his children in his will, required signatures. My signature. And I hadn't signed anything. My fingers, surprisingly steady, typed in the web address for the county recorder's office. I navigated the clunky public records portal, my heart a slow, heavy drum against my ribs. I entered the property address. A list of recent documents appeared. I clicked on the most recent one, deed of gift. The PDF loaded slowly, pixel by pixel. There it was, in black and white. Grantors, Calla Jameson, Lily Jameson. Grantee, Lily Jameson. And at the bottom of the page, 2 signatures. Lily's was her familiar, looping script. And next to it, my name. But it wasn't my handwriting. It was close, a careful, almost childish imitation. The C was too round, the J too rigid. It was the signature of someone who had practiced, but who didn't understand the natural rhythm of my hand. A forgery. A clumsy, arrogant forgery. I leaned back, the warmth of the tea mug in my hands doing nothing to chase away the chill that spread through me. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't an oversight. It was a deliberate act of erasure. My father, it had to be him, his handwriting was all over the moving boxes, had signed my name, had stolen my birthright from under my feet, and had done so with the casual confidence of a man who believed he was entitled to make my decisions for me. The pain was sharp, but beneath it, something else was taking shape. Not rage, but a cold, crystalline resolve. For years, I had accepted their narrative. Lily was the capable one, I was the sensitive, impractical one. They had built their family around this convenient fiction, and I had quietly furnished my assigned room within it. But looking at that forged signature, I saw the lie for what it was. It wasn't about my capabilities. It was about their control. I stood and walked over to my drafting table, where a half-finished illustration of a forest in winter waited for me. I picked up a piece of charcoal and a clean sheet of heavy paper. I didn't draw the forest. I began to sketch from memory. The proud, unyielding set of my father's jaw, the flicker of calculation in my mother's eyes, Lily's bright, unseeing smile. And then I drew my own hand, holding a pen, the lines clean and sure. My own signature, authentic and clear. I spent the rest of the morning not in grief, but in careful, methodical action. I opened a trunk at the foot of my bed, a chest my grandfather had given me. Inside, beneath old sketchbooks and bundled letters, was a folder he'd labeled for Calla, just in case. I'd never opened it. I had never felt the need. Now I untied the twine. Inside was a copy of his original will and a separate, notarized document he'd had drawn up 5 years ago, a year before he passed. It was a deed of trust for the house. It stipulated that the property was to be held in joint tenancy by Lily and me, and could not be sold or transferred without the express, notarized consent of both parties. Any attempt to circumvent this would render the transfer void. He had foreseen this. He had known the fault lines in his own family. Tucked into the folder was a small, handwritten note on his personal stationery. Calla, your strength is not in your voice, but in your vision. You see things as they are. Never let anyone tell you that what you see isn't real. This house is your anchor. Don't let them pull it up. Tears finally came, not of sorrow, but of a profound, aching gratitude. He had seen me. All this time, when I thought I was invisible, he had seen me. I printed out the forged deed from the county website and laid it next to my grandfather's notarized document on my table. The lie and the truth side by side. I looked at the job ad, still sitting there, a monument to their low expectations. I picked it up, folded it neatly, and placed it inside the just-in-case folder. It was evidence, too. Evidence of their perception of my worth. My phone buzzed. A text from Lily. It was a photo of her standing on the porch of the house, holding the brass key up to the camera, beaming. The caption read, "First morning in my new home. Feels so right. You should come visit when you're not so stressed." I looked at the photo, at the lie she was so happily living. I typed a reply, my thumb hovering over the screen. It's not your home. But I deleted it. This was not a battle to be fought over text messages. This required a different kind of strength, the quiet, unyielding power of the truth. Instead, I called a number from a business card tucked into my grandfather's folder. Elias Vance, attorney at law. A deep, calm voice answered on the second ring. Mr. Vance? My name is Kella Jameson. My grandfather, Howard Jameson Sr., was a client of yours. I believe it's time we talked. The law office of Elias Vance was on a quiet, tree-lined street in a neighboring town, occupying the ground floor of a restored Victorian house. It was the kind of place that valued discretion and history over sleek, modern aesthetics. Mr. Vance himself was much like his office, older, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and a manner that was both gentle and firm. He had been my grandfather's closest friend. He listened without interruption as I laid out the story, my voice steady as I presented the documents: the forged deed, my grandfather's original trust, the job ad, the text from Lily. I spread them across his polished mahogany desk like pieces of a puzzle. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the forged signature. He finally looked up at me, his expression one of deep sadness, but not surprise. Your grandfather was a wise man, Kella, he said, his voice a low rumble. He worried this day would come. He saw the dynamic in your family, how Howard and Beverly always cleared a path for Lily, often at your expense. He leaned forward, folding his hands. He put that clause in the trust for a reason. He called it the clarity clause. He knew you wouldn't fight for something you didn't believe was rightfully yours, but he also knew that if they ever pushed you this far, you would have the clarity to see the truth. And the courage to act on it. What do I do? I asked, the question feeling impossibly large. Legally, this is straightforward, Elias explained. We have clear evidence of fraud. We can file a petition to invalidate the deed transfer. But Kella, he paused, looking at me intently, you need to be prepared for what that means. This will not be a quiet conversation. This will force a confrontation. It will likely sever the ties you have left with your family. The word sever hung in the air. I thought of the years I had spent trying to hold those frayed ties together, knotting them with my own silence, my own acquiescence. I thought of the moving boxes labeled MISC, as if the remnants of my childhood were miscellaneous clutter. They severed the ties when they forged my name, I said, and the certainty in my own voice surprised me. They decided I wasn't part of the family anymore. They just didn't have the courage to tell me to my face. Elias nodded slowly, a flicker of pride in his eyes that reminded me so much of my grandfather. All right then. We'll start with a formal letter. A demand to nullify the deed and return the property to the trust. We give them a chance to do the right thing. And if they don't? Then we proceed to court. But I have a feeling the letter will be effective. I left his office feeling lighter than I had in years. The fight ahead was daunting, but for the first time, I wasn't fighting against shadows. I was armed with the truth, a truth my grandfather had carefully preserved for me. The letter was sent the next day. A week of silence followed. I spent the time in my loft, working on my illustrations with a focus I hadn't felt in months. My art had always been my refuge, but now it felt like my strength. The lines I drew were bolder, the colors more vibrant. I was no longer sketching the quiet landscapes of my past, but the rugged, resilient terrain of my future. Then, on a Tuesday morning, my phone rang. It was my mother. "Kella, what is this?" she began, her voice a high, tight wire of fury. "We received a letter from some lawyer. This is absurd. You're tearing this family apart over a house." "A house you tried to steal from me," I said calmly, my heart beating a steady, even rhythm. "We did it for your own good," she insisted, her voice rising. "You're not responsible enough for a property like that. We were trying to protect you, to give you a nudge toward a real life." "My life is real, Mom," I said, the words feeling solid and true in my mouth. "It's just not the one you designed for me. You didn't do this to protect me. You did it because you think I'm a disappointment, and it was easier to write me out of the story than to accept the one I'm writing for myself." There was a choked sound on the other end of the line. "Your father, he is devastated. You have wounded him deeply." "He wounded me when he signed my name on a legal document, pretending to be me," I replied. "The deed needs to be voided. That's all I have to say." I ended the call, my hand not shaking. I had spent a lifetime absorbing their versions of reality. Today, I had given them mine. 2 days later, a call came from Elias. They've agreed to sign the nullification, he said. Their lawyer advised them they have no legal standing. The house will be returned to the joint trust, as per your grandfather's wishes. Relief washed over me, so potent it almost buckled my knees. What happens now? Now, Elias said, a smile in his voice, you decide what you want to do with your half of the house. It's yours to live in, to rent out, or to sell. The choice, for the first time, is entirely yours. That weekend, I drove back to the house. I didn't call ahead. I parked in the driveway and walked up the porch steps, my own set of keys, the ones my grandfather had given me years ago, feeling solid and real in my hand. I let myself in. The house was silent. A stack of mail for Lily sat on the hall table. I walked into the living room. The sketch journal I had given my parents was lying on the coffee table, a glass ring staining its leather cover. I stood there for a long time, in the quiet heart of the home that had been stolen and returned. It was still beautiful, filled with the ghosts of my childhood and the echoes of my grandfather's love. But it was also haunted by the painful truths I had been forced to uncover. I walked back out, closing the door softly behind me. I knew then that my anchor wasn't the house itself. It was the strength I had found in fighting for it. A few weeks later, I put my half of the property up for sale. Lily, forced into a corner, had no choice but to buy me out. The price was fair, determined by an independent appraiser. The money that landed in my bank account was more than I'd ever seen, but it wasn't the number that mattered. It was the principle. It was the closing of a chapter, paid in full. With the proceeds, I bought a small cabin on a few acres of land, deeper in the mountains, with a studio that had a north-facing window and a view of an aspen grove. It was a place where the only expectations were my own. I never received an apology from my parents or my sister. The silence from them was a chasm that would likely never be bridged. But some endings aren't about reconciliation. They are about reclamation. Sometimes, late at night, I sit in my studio and look out at the moonlit trees. I think about the girl who used to believe her purpose was to be a shoreline, to absorb the impact of others. She's still a part of me, but she's no longer standing still. Now, she understands that shorelines aren't just passive boundaries. They are shaped by the tides, yes, but with every wave that recedes, they also reveal what is solid, what is enduring, what remains. The key they gave my sister opened a door, but the truth I found for myself unlocked a life. And that is a home no one can ever take away.